Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about Tear of the Goddess, as I feel like it's one of those items that's not quite super clear what it's intended to be used for, and I feel like a lot of players buy it without knowing exactly why they're buying it or why it's a good idea to buy. So I felt like it made a lot of sense for me today to kind of talk a little bit more about Tear of the Goddess, some of the common pitfalls I see summoners making with it, and giving my advice on how to best use it in your own games. Now, Tear of the Goddess is a starting item of League of Legends. You can buy it off the bat. It costs 400 gold. You can start the game with Tear of the Goddess, but that doesn't necessarily make it a powerful starting choice for an item. The only stat that Tear of the Goddess provides you with is mana, and mana, while a very useful resource, isn't really combat stats. Especially given that most of the mana that Tear of the Goddess is going to be generating for you is not actually accessible until after your first recall, where you've regenerated your mana to full. As a result, therefore, Tear of the Goddess is essentially providing you with no real benefit in lane other than saying, maybe you can cheese out a couple of extra spells. Obviously, after your first back, it's a little bit better, because more mana makes champions better in extended scenarios, for example, laning phase, or during sieges, or during sort of extended fights, which can happen on occasion, but generally your mana pool is still sufficient without the need for buying extra mana. But consider that the enemy champion may have actually purchased damage, right? They might have started with a Doran's Blade, a Doran's Shield, or a Doran's Ring, all of which are extremely gold-efficient items that are providing them with active combat stats. Health, attack damage, ability power, things that are actually going to allow them to take fights and win fights versus Tear of the Goddess, which is providing you with zero of that value. As a result, Tear of the Goddess is an item that, no matter when in the game you buy it, automatically puts you into a power trough. This is an item that is providing you with no real combat stats, which is going to continue providing you with no real combat stats until much later in the game after you've purchased the fully upgraded item and then transformed it. So as a result, you should think twice before just automatically buying Tear of the Goddess as one of your first items. Because if you're in a scenario in which you need a lot of laning power, for example, into a Draven-Leona matchup as Corki or Ezreal, it might not be a good idea to buy an item that's not actually giving you any combat stats, and it might make more sense to start with a Doran's item. Buying Tear of the Goddess second is a good choice. I definitely believe that and think that that's a reasonable idea to use Tear of the Goddess for, but I certainly think that it's less of an obvious choice as potentially going for a Doran's item might be instead. One of the other pitfalls I see with Tear of the Goddess is that, as I've sort of talked about, the item puts you in a power trough until the item is completed. And the item is not going to be completed, unfortunately, until you have actually bought the fully completed item. Again, Tear of the Goddess is one of those items that provides you with zero combat stats. And though the upgraded items do give you some degree of combat stats, which is quite nice, realistically, you're looking to try and actually get the full item, the transformed version, in this case, Seraph's Embrace, Fimbulwinter, or Muramana. Those are the ones that you're actually sort of building towards. The Tear of the Goddess sitting in your inventory is providing you with nothing but mana, which, as I mentioned before, is not a combat stat. It's not doing anything for you. It's just saying, hey, you have a lot more mana, so in potential extended scenarios, maybe this is going to matter. But if you consider it, when you actually come to grips with a champion, someone comes out of the fog of war and starts trying to fight you, you're probably only going to have time to get off one, maybe 2.5 full rotations of your spells, which your base mana is easily going to be able to handle. As a result, that mana isn't really relevant at all unless you're actually able to get the items that are giving you combat stats that'll make that a little bit better. As a result, I find it very easy to just build in the fully completed item as part of the build order of my champion. If I start Tear of the Goddess on Ezreal, for example, I might grab an early Sheen and then immediately finish the Manamune and before working on my major mythic. This means that not only does the completed item help my tier charge faster, but it also means that it's at least providing me with some degree of combat stats while I'm waiting out this power trough. Either way, I do think it needs to be built into your build path somewhere. Tanks have a little bit more of an argument for not buying their Winter's Approach immediately. Winter's Approach actually doesn't become 100% gold efficient until you're almost full up on stacks of your Tear of the Goddess, actually. So, in that case, I think it's fine for a tank to be walking around with a 360 mana Tear of the Goddess sitting in their inventory doing nothing. They kind of don't care until it is at that state, and then they can upgrade it. But fundamentally, once they do have it at 360 mana, they really need to be rushing that Winter's Approach so they can get that Fimbulwinter online. Third and finally, consider if your champion actually needs Tear of the Goddess. Tear of the Goddess I don't think is a windmill slam item that anyone can sort of put into their inventory. There is a caveat to this. I think Muramana, for example, is a very usable item for basically any AD champion that has mana. You're always going to be able to get it because all it does is increase your damage. Similarly, I would argue that almost every single melee champion that has mana is going to be able to take advantage of Fimbulwinter in some way, shape, or form because all they have to do is be able to impair movement. They don't actually have to have the hard crowd control component that Fimbulwinter states. As a result, therefore, even a champion like Malphite, who has one movement impairing ability in his kit outside of his ultimate, can still make use of Fimbulwinter, so if he decides he needs more mana, and Fimbulwinter is an okay choice for him to buy because at least he can still activate the passive. Seraph's Embrace is a bit of a different beast, though. Seraph's really kind of says you need ways of draining your mana pool relatively rapidly, either by firing lots of abilities in quick succession, or by having an ability that you can toggle on that slowly drains your mana, similarly to Anivia's Glacial Storm or Karthus' Defile. In these situations, the Seraph's Embrace passive, you can actually get a lot of value off of, and these champions can actually find a lot of use with buying these items. I think that a lot of other champions with more measured ability cadences, aren't going to get as much value because they're not constantly casting, nor do they have an ability that they can just kind of toggle on and slowly get the passive healing from Seraph's Embrace. They're not going to have as much. For example, Xerath, who spends a lot of his time charging up a Q or firing skill shots from very far away at fairly moderate cooldowns, isn't going to get a lot of healing out of Seraph's Embrace. And fundamentally, he has no need of it because if he's taking damage, he was already too close to begin with. Conversely, champions like Ryze or Cassiopeia actually have a reason to need the mana. They have very low cooldown abilities that they can spam and therefore make the best of Seraph's Embrace, and they do have a somewhat need for a larger mana pool. Ryze has a better argument for this because of his mana scalings, but fundamentally these champions need larger mana pools. If you're playing a champion without sort of these qualities but still feel the need to buy a Tear of the Goddess, I would instead look at your own ability usage and see if you're maybe casting abilities off cooldown and finding little value, because fundamentally a Lost Chapter item is realistically all you need, and if you find that you need more mana outside of that, again, I would look at the ability usage. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know your Tear of the Goddess tips and tricks down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.